Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first BTN Group webinar of 2022. Happy New Year to everyone who has joined us today. The topic of today's webinar is Return to Travel, Balancing the Needs of Your Travelers with Cost Savings. Always a very important topic to discuss. And the content today has been developed and sponsored and will be presented by Booking.com for business. So we're very grateful for their support. My name is Jen Bankert. I'm the Senior Director of Content Solutions and Conferences for the BTN Group. I have just a very few housekeeping items to review before I turn things over to our speakers. Some of this may be familiar to you if you've joined a previous BTN Group webinar, but for those of you who are joining for the first time, you can ask questions during the webinar. So over on the left-hand side of your questions, there's a panel where you can submit questions either for our speakers or if you need any technical support. We are going to be doing 3 polls throughout today's webinar. So when those polls appear, please do answer them as quickly as possible so that we can see the results and discuss them. If you would like to, there's just a few slides for today, not too many, but if you would like to download a copy, you can also do that on the left-hand side of your screen. So you just go to that Event Resources tab and you can save the slide deck. We are recording today's webinar, so if you miss any of it, you will receive a link to the recording within 2 hours of the close of the webinar. And finally, as I transition over to introducing our speakers, if you'd like to read more about any of them, you can click on the Speaker Bio tab on your screen. So with that said, I'm going to introduce Josh Wood, who is the Director of Business Travel, Booking.com for Business. And Josh is going to be your fearless leader for today. Joining him, a name and face familiar to many of you, I'm sure, Tony DeStolfo, who is with Serko. And I'm thrilled to welcome Lawrence Vanderbilt, who's the Global Travel Manager for Booking.com. But Josh, I'm going to let you take it from here, and I'll pop back on at the end to help with some Q&A.
Great. Thanks so much, Jen. I really appreciate it. And why don't we start with our very first poll question on what's most important to you as travelers to keep your employees safe, or travel managers to keep your employees safe while traveling. You know, we're all thinking about returning to travel. As you look at our webinar, you'll see that certainly Lawrence and I are calling from our attics. Tony, you look like you might be in your living room. But all of us are anxious to get back out into the world again and see the sights and reconnect with people versus only talking through these webcams, which have been going on for far too long. I've noticed that many of us have forgotten that it's been 2 years that we've been in sort of a COVID lockdown, and everything has been compressed to 1 year, right? So that's been amazing. So already we're seeing results come in, and it looks like the majority of you care most about visibility of safety measures and travel restrictions within a travel program. And certainly I know we've done a lot of work in that space as Booking.com as well as Booking.com for Business. And what I'd like to ask now, Tony, is you're constantly talking to people. You're constantly talking to travel managers and understanding what their needs are as you take Serko's Xeno platform out into the world. And I know you've been very successful in winning over more and more customers, and that groundswell is growing because of all the features that you offer. I'm just wondering what you're hearing from travel managers about the return to travel, about safety.
Well, it's very interesting that the poll kind of resonated with what we're hearing, right? The first thing people want is the ability to actually restrict travel to certain places. Historically, that used to mean places where travel might be unsafe because of civil unrest, right? So, you know, take the current situation in Afghanistan. That would have been historically how people thought about it. But today, I think they're thinking about it as, oh, there's an outbreak, and there's a significant number of, COVID cases. And so people are worried about where people are going, what they're going to encounter if they get there. So the first thing they want to do is restrict the trip. They want you to say, if somebody's planning a trip, I want to make sure that it's to a place that the company is comfortable with having them go. Then the second thing most of them are saying is, okay, if we're going to get back to travel, then I want them completely informed as they're booking the trip. right? So what can I provide to them in the way of information that would help them make a much more informed selection, right? So right at the point of purchase, in the booking tool, as an example, in Xeno, we have something called the Travel Safe feature that allows people to review all of the COVID-19 safety requirements for travel. That'll include destination entry restrictions, COVID-19 testing and safety requirements. Do you need a PCR test or an antigen test? Will you have to quarantine when you get there, if you're vaccinated, if you're not? And then all of these and documentation requirements. So that's the second thing I think people are eating right at the point of making a decision. Some of the stuff that's always been in tools, but now gets highlighted, is things like health and safety. What are the airlines doing? What are the hoteliers doing? We've been pulling in content from Route Happy for years. The GDS has some areas where hoteliers can add things like, what they're doing on the cleanliness side. So all of those are things that people are asking for, requiring as they get people back to travel. The other thing I'll ask is, when they finish the booking, when they're actually on the road, before they take the trip, I think people want to be tracking where are they going, because things are changing so quickly. So most people have said, yeah, I'd love a dashboard to know where all my trips are and whether there's a challenge, right? You booked something 3 weeks ago. The world changes very quickly nowadays. So that's the other thing, just kind of tracking before people go and then tracking when they go. So those are the kind of things we've been hearing from customers.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And Lawrence, as the guy in charge of all business travel for all of Booking.com, how does that resonate with how you're thinking about travel? What's it look like for a travel manager in navigating this space, especially in a country that right now we're in, a partial lockdown?
Yeah, it's very important to stay current, with all the developments that are going on a daily basis. So what we do within Booking.com is that we are in close partnership, working together with our global security department. And within the daily context, we have also, of course, engaged with the duty of care provider. The duty of care provider, helps us to keep our travelers safe. And the way it works is that all the employees who are booking, let's say, who need to make travel arrangements, will use our internal booking tool. So all the travel arrangements that are made within the booking tool do automatically flow into the duty of care tool, so that the duty of care provider, but also my travel team, is able to, to be aware of the whereabouts of all the travelers. So in the event of, a crisis situation or an outbreak, we will always be able to detect them, to find the people and to locate them, and if necessary, be in touch with them. Apart from that, it's also working the other way around, that all the corporate travelers will have 24/7 access to the duty of care provider for further support. So that's something that we facilitate as well. And to make sure that we continue to have, let's say, engagement on this field, is that as we speak, we are building also a bot functionality. So from an internal tool that we are rolling out. And with the bot functionality, we will be able to continually stay in touch with the employee. Messages will be sent to them to confirm if they're okay, if they have arrived safe and sound, based on the travel schedule, etc. And we do believe that we are making stronger efforts to achieve engagement, not only pre-trip, but also during the trip and post-trip.
Yeah, well, as a Booking.com employee, thank you so much, right? Because, I'm certainly one of your frequent travelers, or at least I used to be. I haven't really gone anywhere in the last 2 years or so. But I know how much you think about traveler safety and happiness over time. And it's great to see how that resonates, right? With someone that's doing that job every day, which certainly hasn't gotten easier. And then Tony talking to a bunch of people out in the market that are thinking about this space as well. And I know as we think about developing Booking for Business, our product design for small to medium-sized businesses, it's the same sort of things that we're putting in place, right? Instead of having a duty of care provider externally where we're passing out information, we have things like traveler maps and notifications of here's what the requirements are. So it's something we certainly think about even on the small to medium-sized business side as well. And with that, why don't we move on to the next poll question? So poll number 2, what is the most important to your employees when it comes to business travel? So what are the things they're concerned about? Is it wide offering of accommodation and transport options, ease of use, ability to combine business and leisure travel, the old bleisure trips that we've been hearing so much about? Now we hear more about the digital nomad. I just want to work from anywhere. I don't care where I'm at. If I'm remote anyway, why can't I be in Tahiti as long as they have good internet connections? Flexible booking and cancellation options and sustainable travel choices. So let's see as we start to see the business people in the audience starting to reply. And right now we have a dead heat between wide offering of accommodation and flexible booking and cancellation options. And now we're starting to see flexible booking and cancellation options take the lead, but only just. And actually, it's a bit back and forth. So it seems like the audience, at least, the things that they're thinking about most are around the wide offering of accommodation and transport options, ease of use around the booking tool, and then flexibility in cancellation options. So if we think about flexibility, Lawrence, how do you think about this in the context of you've defined a travel policy for our employees? How do you think about flexibility and adapting to the changing needs and the changing desires of your travelers?
Yeah, so how we work within Booking.com is that we work closely together with a TMC and also with my travel team. So all employees do have, let's say, access to our travel tool, the booking tool, in which they can, let's say, arrange their own flights or, a train ticket. And what we have done is that we have set up, let's say, some contracts with those suppliers to make sure that we also look at the financial part of it and that we always have the best deals. And within that framework of deals, employees are, let's say, free to select the option that works best for them. And that's actually what we are trying to facilitate. But it's sometimes what we are also looking at. Now, what we are always looking at also is safety and well-being. So we try to combine all those three elements, flexibility, well-being, and safety, into one optimal ingredient so that the traveler has the best option to choose. But in essence, what it means is that we give the liberty to select the option that works best for the employee.
It sounds like the old adage of cheap, fast, and good. Pick two. You can't have all three. But it's great to see, Lawrence, that you're actually trying to deliver all three to the employees. And Tony, what Lawrence was describing, is that similar to what you're hearing in the market and what your experience is in looking around flexibility?
Yeah, you always want to find that right kind of position between controlling the program, right, which so many travel buyers are trying to do, with creating a great environment, the convenience. And I noticed, that the third most important element in the poll was making the tools easier to use, right? And so we focused a lot on that, and we're trying to create an environment whereby, Xeno will use artificial intelligence, will curate the search results, and then make a recommendation that considers the user preferences, the company policy, and what the user's done in the past, right? And so that's our kind of approach to say, hey, your policy is in there, it's going to be reflected, but we're also going to try to incorporate some of what the user's done or likes to do, and then feed the results there. The flexibility part, I think it talks about mobile and the use of mobile, the increasing use of mobile. People want the flexibility to go to their mobile and make an on-the-fly booking or a change to a booking. So that becomes an important element. I think the other place where I think in a managed program, you have to have the ability to change very quickly. And so our policy management dashboard allows you to do that. You can actually create a policy of one if you so desire, but you have the ability to go in and kind of very quickly adapt and, kind of appreciate what the travelers are dealing with and then particularly changed change the policy to conform to that. So it's a combination of things, but I think we're trying to find that sweet spot between what do we need to do to make sure that our travel program's not, completely out of control, but also do it with an eye on, hey, I want to be providing our travelers with a great experience and making sure that I'm meeting their objectives when they're traveling and on the road.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, so the poll results have now stabilized, and it's neck and neck, right? Between wide offering of accommodation options, ease of use, and flexible booking and cancellation options.
Yeah, and the cancellation part's an interesting one. I think what we saw during the pandemic was there were so many people that had tickets that were not being used, and so the airlines reduced their restrictions, which was really a good thing. So make it a lot easier to make changes. But we had this whole hangover of all the tickets that were not used. And I think people are still dealing with that. So that's another component of this, how for the travel manager, you catch up with all of this unused, ticket inventory while maintaining flexibility for the traveler. So I think the airlines have stepped up, which I think is really, really a good thing, to allow for changes without some of those onerous penalties that they had previous to the pandemic.
Yeah, and I was going to say, as someone that's thinking about this in a Booking.com for business context, these three things are the three things that we think about every day. So there's no one in the world that has a wider selection of accommodation than we do. And that content's then all piped into Serko, into Concur, into so many different booking tools and so many different TMCs. And then we also think a lot about flexible booking and cancellation options, which is why we highlight that so much. Like, we're seeing people really respond well to the free cancellation, to the ability to make changes on the fly. Now, before we go into poll question number 3, I should remind the audience that this is interactive and it's way more interesting when it's a dialogue versus a monologue. So please put in your questions so we can ask our panelists some of the questions you might have. And with that, we'll go into poll question number 3. Which is, where do you see the biggest savings options for your company? So as we're thinking about this context, and if you're in the travel space, which I'm assuming you are if you're attending our webinar, how are you thinking about savings? Are you thinking about reducing time spent on actually booking the business trips, no user or booking fees, negotiated rates, loyalty programs, saving money notifications throughout the booking journey? So if we think about, sort of the ancient sort of tools have the idea of, lowest common logical fares, and it completely makes sense for you to go at 3 a.m. On a flight versus 7 a.m. Save $50. Clearly defined and embedded travel policies. Those are the sort of things we're thinking about. And it looks like the audience is really thinking a lot about negotiated rates. And I can understand why. I mean, that's certainly, I think, a challenge for many of the people, especially in the last 2 years, where they're no longer driving the volume that leads to those negotiated rates. So, Laura, as these poll results come in, and it looks like negotiated rates is going to be the winner, followed up closely by clearly defined and embedded travel policy, how do you continue to drive down costs? It's really important to save money, but it's also important to keep your travelers safe and happy. And how are you able to balance that?
Yeah, I think I already gave it away a little bit in the previous 2 answers. So in the first place, employees do have, let's say, the liberty within the framework of rules to select their own flights, right? But if we look at it from a cost perspective, if you look at, the previous 2 years, you see that travel volumes have dropped significantly. And what we've learned within Booking.com is that we can do more with less. So sometimes it's possible to achieve better results due to virtual meetings rather than doing physical meetings. So we believe, and that's also a poll that we did internally, is that we want to drive on essential travel only, because we do see that the most significant results can be there if we limit, let's say, the travel volumes. And what we then do on the other hand, is that we do open up, let's say, the preferences for people so that they have more options to book, let's say, accommodations, maybe a 4-star rated accommodation instead of a 3-star rated accommodation. So we will be strict. We will be a little bit less stricter on the travel policy itself in terms of what people can spend on a daily basis. And that's being freed up by the fact that we are trying to steer on essential travel only. Apart from that, like I mentioned, we are developing a bot functionality together with some logic that we build into the booking tool. We also remind people about, let's say, okay, you can also take this flight. So it also determines, okay, the lowest logical fare. If people have selected an option that is maybe not as inexpensive as we want them to be, but if that schedule works better for them, they still have the liberty to bypass that remark and to choose the selection that works best for them.
Well, I certainly appreciate that. As someone that pre-pandemic had to routinely fly to New Zealand, 24 hours in an airplane is quite a stretch. So once we're able to, Jacinda opens up the country and we're able to travel again, I'm looking forward to booking a nice 4-star hotel in Auckland, Lawrence. So thank you for amending the travel policy. I'm sure that's not what you meant as far as me just completely abusing the policy. And I still want to be employed. I quite like working where I work and with the people I work with. But it's fun to think about. And Tony, what tools are available within Xeno for customers to help save money?
Yeah, so this is an area, big area of focus for us, right? So first thing, we have a trip budget feature that enables the organization to set spend amounts for air, hotel, rental car, and then to require approval if you exceed the amounts, right? So very basic functionality. The recommendation engine I talked about earlier is hopefully doing what you just kind of alluded to wanting to have done, right? It will say, the corporate travel policy is this, but Josh also likes to do that. So let's go find something that fits both of those. And ideally, our recommendation engine is actually doing that. It's basically saying, okay, this is within the corporate policy, but looking at the past bookings of the traveler, it also fits nicely with them. It's either the hotel they like to use, the airline they like to use, whatever. We are guilty as charged. You mentioned this in the lead-in. We do present the potential savings on the screen at the point of purchase. So if you select this, it's $50 less than that. That has always been, that visual guilt has always been very useful and has worked in the past with driving people to make decisions. Now, we kind of wrap that within a policy that says you don't have to go to extremes, right? So if you're not taking double connections, you're not flying 5 hours longer than you have to fly, we'll let the company say, yeah, if it's within 30 minutes or an hour, then yes, we will ask them to do something different. We talked a little bit about it in the last question, just about reusing tickets. It's important. It will help companies save money, reduce their overall cost. And then the last thing we do is, which will be interesting coming out of the pandemic, we can configure business rules in Xeno that would require lead time, minimum lead time. So you try to push people to make their reservations as far in advance as possible so that they can take advantage of the best fare offerings. Typically, that has also yielded some reduced costs to the company. So it's a combination of things. But again, trying to find that sweet spot between control and also giving some flexibility to the travel.
Right, and that's a really interesting comment, Tony, about the booking further out and seeing how that plays in a world where we need more flexibility because things are changing as well, right? So then it's you book further out, but you make sure you book free cancellation because in a week from now, who knows whether you can still go there.
All bets are off. Yeah, this is going to be very interesting. You talked about lowest logical and advanced booking. These are things that will probably, we'll see them be modified as a result of the pandemic, right? Just behavior is suggesting that, yeah, I'd love to book everything as far in advance as possible, but I need that flexibility. So it'll be interesting to see where this falls in.
Yeah, I think one other thing that we do at Booking to save money. So if I think about me as an employee, we at Booking, we have our loyalty program called Genius, and we've actually just announced Genius Level 3. where you can save up to 20% off of normal publicly available rates. As Booking employees, we're required to use Booking.com in order to book all of our accommodation travel. So already we're getting savings because we already have some of the best pricing and certainly the best value in the industry. And we've actually now made those Genius Level 3 rates are also available on Booking for Business too. So anyone signing up and using the product can very rapidly qualify to get rates that, like I said, are up to 20% off lower than any publicly available rates.
I'm going to give you a shameless plug here because I've used the Genius thing many times, particularly when I'm going to someplace where I've never been. And I know you guys have a ton of content, you've curated it down, and then to say, I'm going to get a deal, it's a no-brainer, right? And that's part of what we're also seeing, that I think one of the earlier poll questions was people want more content, right? And this shows up beautifully when you can say, hey, it's content that's been curated for business, but also throws a deal at you, which is just brilliant. So yeah, I'll give you a shameless plug because I use it all the time.
Well, I appreciate that, Tony, and the $5 is in the mail, I assure you. If it doesn't get there in time, it's because of the postal service.
Well, because anybody that'll call me a genius got my vote, right? Because I've never been called a genius.
Oh, that's hilarious. Before we go to the question and answer section, is there anything, Lawrence, that you'd like to add as the travel manager for Booking, like how you think about the space, how you think about the world opening back up again?
What do you mean exactly, Josh? So once travel will be reopened completely?
Yeah, just any sort of ray of sunshine, right? We're locked in our attics right now. We're not going to be locked in forever. If you had to place a $5 bet, when are we traveling again?
Good question. I would say, just do whatever makes you happy. And of course, from a business perspective, that it makes sense. Be safe. I know that we have everybody has been looking forward, to travel again. And even though it is attractive, it's also very much important to take care of your well-being. So sometimes that clashes. So what I just would like to say in general is that I hope that everybody finds the right balance between travel and leisure, or the well-being, and it will for sure it will be good.
Thanks so much, Lawrence. That's great. And Tony, any predictions? When am I seeing you in person again?
Oh, great question. I would say I think we're going to wait till the spring to have a true. Unfortunately, I think people are getting a little bit concerned now with the Omicron. So I think this first quarter is not going to be great for business travel. I think we're going to see a real nice upswing in the spring, and then the summer, I think we'll be back to blazing. So I'm going to see you definitely in the summer.
I can't wait, my friend. Okay, and with that, we'll turn it over to Jen for the question and answer section.
All right, fantastic. So we've had some questions come in from the audience, and Tony, I'm actually going to pose the first one to you. It's a two-part question. So I'll read the whole thing and then I'll let you answer sort of each part one at a time. So this question is from Michelle, and she's asking, what is the most important data point to focus on to support the return to travel? And then the follow-up is essentially, how do you quantify the value of travel when it impacts revenue versus using virtual tools like Zoom, et cetera?
Great question, because we've learned to live without travel for 2 years. Many companies are doing just fine, right? So I would go to your primary constituent prior to a pandemic, and this would probably be your sales team, and talk to your sales team about whether they need travel to engage more directly with customers. Sales, account management, anybody talking directly to customers that will drive revenue, that's where I'd go first. Those guys are probably chomping to get back out there. I can tell you, as a sales guy that hasn't seen people as regularly as I normally would, it is absolutely not the same talking to them over Zoom. No offense, the technology is great, but I can get so much more done when I'm sitting down with someone. I can infer just the way they're talking, the way their body languages, so I would say go back to that constituency where travel was most important and see what they're thinking. And then literally you got to sit with the finance folks and just balance out. Look, we're going to return to travel. My feeling is that Zoom and other web applications are going to replace some business travel. It's not going to happen as readily. The other thing I think is interesting is I also think there's going to be a new kind of cohort of travel, that people that normally don't travel but are not in an office are going to travel to get together. There's going to be that whole new, I think Josh mentioned it, that nomad, where, hey, I work from wherever. If you're working alone and you have typically gone to an office, I think there's definitely a loss of engagement. And I think companies are going to start to say, hey, let's bring our people together, not every day, but once a quarter, so that they can engage and that we can kind of get some value out of that interaction. So that's another cohort that I think is going to pop up as we start to return.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up sort of that internal team travel, Tony. So when we talk about people, we have a much more distributed workforce now. And we hear, anecdotally people talking about, collaborations just not the same, building relationships within the organization just isn't the same. So how do you measure, like, what data point do you use for that internal travel? Like, what are you measuring?
Yeah, see, that's a great question. I think historically there was a lot of collaboration and/or meetings that people would say, well, we haven't done it, and so we got away with doing it. But I also think there's, you talk about coffee, water cooler chat. The more you know about the people you work with, I think the more engaged you are to the company, right? So you're working with a bunch of people, you're working for a bunch of people. And the company becomes more than just a place to get a paycheck from. I think we all have lost some of that. I know I have lost some of that when we're not seeing and being engaged with people. So now I think the best way to do it is to survey people, right? And just say, how well do you know the people you work with? Do you feel as confident that you are effective? Some of those things that probably sit in the domain of HR. Are you happy? I also think we need to start polling people just generally about their well-being, not having gotten out of the house for 2 years and having to work from home. And then there's the last thing is that kind of work-life balance between I'm always on versus I go to work and I work for my 10 hours and then I'm off. So a lot in there, but I would say just surveying people to say, what is it you're feeling relative to your engagement to the company and your coworkers?
Yeah, all really excellent points, Tony. Thank you so much for that. Josh, I'm going to pose this next question to you. This question came in. It says, I know that some hotels don't honor reward points when travelers book through a third party. So do you have any suggestion for ways to encourage travelers to get their points while still receiving the best rate and oftentimes prepaying for their lodging?
So those are really two separate questions, right? So let's take payment out of it for a second.
Okay.
Travelers want their rates, they want their points, and Travel Manager wants their best rate. Unfortunately, many times those things are mutually exclusive, right? Like points are not free. They're not free. There's a cost associated with those, and you'll see that cost, and sometimes that the rate's higher. The free bottle of water you get from having a certain class of membership costs you $50 because your hotel rate was actually $50 higher than it could have been. We also see just in general that there's a move from customers moving from traditional chain properties to now alternative accommodation. And what we're finding out is that for more and more travelers, being able to book in a service department because they're there for a week and a half is better than the experience sitting in a traditional chain. Not for everyone, like points still certainly have a role to play, but you'll see that how valuable those points are goes down based on sort of age brackets of travelers, as well as how often someone travels. So if you don't travel that often, having it tied into a rewards program doesn't really give you any benefits. As far as prepaying, for the vast majority of content that sits on Booking.com and Booking for Business, and even within the GDS, there's payment flexibility where you can either pay in advance or you can pay at the property. And oftentimes paying in advance, you'll save money. If you couple that with then saying, well, I'm going to be, one of the things Tony talked about was figuring out, hey, let's book further in advance. If you flip it around and you say, I'm going to be in Chicago tomorrow, and you book, that hotel rate for tomorrow, well, you book the non-refundable because you're going. And already you're going to save 10% or so off of the full flex rate. So there's also abilities to save money based on what type of policy you're taking and what type of payment policy. So all of those things combined give you the best rate.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know anytime I've thought about booking a prepaid, prepaying, but it's like well in advance of the trip, I have like such anxiety. It's like, what if something happens, even though I'm saving, money? So that goes along with it.
500 return. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to pick up.
Lawrence, a question for you from the travel manager perspective. How do you keep historical discounts when volumes have been, so low over the past few years? So do you have any sort of good tips for other travel managers in terms of how you can sort of work with your vendors to sort of value that long-term partnership? And then I have a follow-up question as well.
Yeah, so from my personal experience, that really depends on the supplier that you're working with, and also from your historical volumes. So some suppliers are very keen, to keep, let's say, historical rates also in the current situation, whereas some other suppliers will drop. So yeah, that's I don't have, let's say, a Midas touch on that. It's really supplier specific. Of course, also we do, let's say, have forecast in terms of travel volumes, and we try sometimes also to find, let's say, alternatives to do with the same supplier. So let's say parallel business that should also lead to additional discount, or that we can at least retain or keep the same with discount rates as we had in the past.
Great. And then the follow-up question is really then related to sort of the booking tool itself and other technology partners. So, obviously throughout this conversation, we've talked about the importance of having a lot of content, making sure that policy is embedded in the booking process so that you can sort of influence that traveler behavior, right? You want them to have the best options so that they can be compliant, but they're also making not just smart choices in terms of costs, but smart choices in terms of other things like, maybe sustainability. So do you have any recommendations for how you can work with your technology partners to ensure that you're aligned on those company priorities?
Yeah, so within Booking.com, so of course, if you follow the news, we do a lot on sustainability as well. Not only for the enterprises, but also internally. So sustainability is also a very important element that has been brought into the entire travel policy. So as part of the entire booking process, this has also been scoped into, let's say, the logic, the booking process. So what we did, we built in our travel policy into this bot functionality, but also in the booking tool combined to help the employee to make the best decision. I'm not saying that this is the perfect solution, because sometimes employees may still need to consider other solutions than, that is being provided to them, but then they still have the liberty to deviate from that. However, we sometimes also dictate things. So for example, an Amsterdam-based employee who wants to travel to Paris does really need to have a very good reason to not take the train. So we really want to make sure that they take the train rather than a plane, but there's always an exceptional relief on that if needed.
Sure.
I'm not
Great.
sure if that answered the question, though.
No, that's really helpful. And again, there's no one answer that's going to work for everyone, but it's really helpful to have your perspective on what's been working for you and your travelers. So we have
one note in general, because we did a poll also amongst the booking employees, at least the frequent traveler road warriors, let's say like Josh. And what we found out was that the majority of the travelers are really keen to travel sustainable. So what we have learned, as long as you give, let's say, good insights, good explanations and tools like Tony just described, people are really willing to stick to it. And then we see the engagement really, going up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and those of you in the UK and Europe have a big advantage over those of us based in the US in terms of your rail options. So we're still working to catch up with you in that.
You don't like Amtrak?
Tony, let's admit it. Amtrak is just not the same. It's great, and no disparaging Amtrak. I love traveling by train. We just don't have the same kind of options here, right?
Except for a couple of corridors, it's such a nice way to travel. I wish it was better, and hopefully it will get better. So.
Absolutely, we will one day. So Tony, we have just. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
I was just going to say, based on CES, it doesn't seem like Elon Musk's tunnel of Teslas is going to be the future of travel either.
Now we're going in a completely different direction. So I'm going to try and bring us back because we have just a few minutes left. So Tony, I'm going to pose this next question to you. So there's been a little reference to sort of advanced purchase. So what is that window now that times have changed a bit? So, historically the sweet spot had been 14 to 30 days in advance to balance sort of cost as well as risk of cancellation. Tony, in your opinion, is that still sort of the best window, or has that changed a bit?
I think it's going to change because I think it's going to become narrower, and I think there's a bunch of reasons why. First is that I think the environment is changing so rapidly that people are not going to, they're going to have to adapt, right? And they're going to have to be a little bit more fluid with the stuff. Second thing is I think the suppliers have been a little bit more gracious on some of this. So I don't see the huge fluctuations that we did previously. I think and especially when it comes to booking business travel typically had a booking pattern, and you were trying to figure out what's the best time to book. I think there's been so little booking travel, so little high yield stuff, that I think the windows have been opened a little more. Now that might shut quickly as we start to return to travel, but I would say it's not you don't have to book as far in advance as you did in the past. And I think in the short term, that's probably going to be the case.
Yeah. I think it's also going to vary market to market. I think that's probably fair to say.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, so we have, I think, time for just one more question, and then we'll do a quick close. And Tony, I think I'll also push this one to you, just because I know you have an opportunity to talk to lots of different customers. Erica's noting that a lot of hotels are starting to push back on using those 2019 volume for 2022 negotiations. As Josh said earlier, we're now 2 years into this thing. So, I don't know if 2019 is the right place to start anymore. Just what are your thoughts on that? What is the data people should be using moving forward?
Yeah, I think the historical data, right? Number of employees, number of profile travelers. The fact that they're not on the road doesn't mean they're not going to get back on the road. And so I think if you had a big travel program prior to the pandemic, the chances of you having a relatively big travel program after are there. And I think that's the kind of thing I would reinforce with a supplier. I don't think suppliers should get short-sighted at this time, because I think there will be a return. And I think the last thing you want to do is kind of tick off one of your good customers by not extending them an opportunity to get a good deal when their volume is way down, right? Because I think at some point it's going to come back.
Sure.
But it's a hard one. It really is a hard one,
Yeah. And then Lawrence, just again, from the travel manager perspective, I'd be curious to hear what your experience has been with this recently, if you're able to speak to that for Booking's program.
Yeah, so with the majority of suppliers, they were very keen to keep us aboard as a client. So in that perspective, also, looking at historical data, they softened maybe their approach. It required some negotiation skills, but we have a very good procurement department who helped us with that. So I think, if you look at it overall, I think that we can be quite satisfied with the results when negotiating new contracts and having the best rates in place for us. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, we have come to the end of our time. So before I do my closing housekeeping remarks, Josh, I just want to throw it back to you to see if you have any thing that you'd like to share before we wrap up.
Just thank you so much for everyone's time. Really appreciate it. Hopefully everyone that's attended was able to get a variety of different opinions and thoughts on business travel in general when it returns. It's something that all three of us are constantly thinking about and are passionate about. So we're going to get back to travel. Like, I'm not staying in this attic forever. And I'm going to get a haircut. The world's opening up. I'm going to go to a restaurant.
Here.
It's amazing.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for your time today, Josh, Tony, Lawrence. Really appreciate your insights. Thanks to everyone who attended today's webinar. As you close out, you're going to be redirected to a very brief survey. We would definitely appreciate your feedback. It helps in terms of future planning. To learn more about Booking.com for Business, we've got the link there. And as a reminder, you will receive a link to the recording of this webinar within the next few hours, and you can find recordings of 30 plus other webinars on the businesstravelnews.com website. So with that said, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.